Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May we allow our studies to be illumined from this. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good. So, as usual, I'll invite some questions. I have some questions sent to me, but in any event, I have two questions. I'll read these questions out, and we'll see if together we can systematically answer them. So the one question sent to me was this. Sri Ramakrishna often says in his songs in the gospel, to go in depth. What does depth mean in spirituality, and how can we go in depth? So two questions are there. What do we mean by depth? What is meant in spirituality? And how can we go into it? Then the second question may be related. So the second question goes like this. In the book Practicing of the Presence by Brother Lawrence, he mentions, since you are with me now, as I take up my work, it's a prayer. It's a prayer to the Lord. Turning my attention to the external affairs of my life, I ask you for the gift of your presence. Help me as I work, receive all that I do, take my love. As I continue with my work, I continue my intimate conversation with God, asking for divine grace, surrendering all that I do. A wonderful prayer. It's a prayer that we could all easily adopt. Now the question goes like this. What does surrender of work mean in a practical way? We are engaged in various professional, personal, secular tasks and wanted to understand how we can surrender all we do. Those two very, very good questions. Let's deal with the first question, which is, what does depth mean in spirituality? How can we go in depth? So we don't normally know what depth means in spirituality. We don't know it either as a goal or as a process. All we can do is use analogies. So we have two analogical examples before us. One is the comparison of the ocean. I don't know if anybody has yet fathomed the depth of the ocean. I think there was a survey done, and we understand the deepest part of all the oceans. And it goes down, of course, several kilometers. And then do we understand the depth of space? Space exploration has taken a great technological turn, and we understand more about the vastness of space. One thing we know about the infinite space, as it were, before us, outer space as we call it, as opposed to inner space, we realize how much we don't know. And it gives us a vastness. The difficulty with these two examples, of course, is they're entirely egocentric examples. So when we look at the ocean, we can conceptually understand it in an abstract way. And we can imagine that there are waves in the ocean. And we can imagine that as we go down deeper, things become more quiet. We enter into a world of solitude. It becomes a little eerie and strange for us. And as we go much deeper, we discover that it is still not deep enough to have no life in. Tiny organisms are there, which have no necessity to see in the dark, or no necessity to see in the normal way. And all their apparatus is adapted to the depth, first of all, the pressure of the water. And secondly, there's a luminosity which is understood at that depth. Every example, of course, will have its faults. When we understand the sky, we're looking at it from an entirely geocentric, egocentric point of view. That is why we say up. we're looking up into the sky, but we could equally say down, because when you go outside, as it were, the atmosphere of the Earth, what we call L1, L2, these are ranges. When we go to L1 and try to measure things, we have to be careful because we may be measuring effects from the oceans and the Earth. And when we go to L2, which is where current measurements are being held, which is where the James Webb telescope is, then we have the advantage of being less influenced by all the disturbances in the Earth's atmosphere and also the solar system as such. And we now have this telescope, James Webb telescope, that is able to screen all these things out as much as possible and give us a much greater clarity at the objects that we were seeing far away with the Hubble telescope. So it is a duplication of the human eye, but it is still the human eye in extension. It still has to be translated. It's looking at things in the infrared, and we cannot see things in the infrared. In the infrared, we get much more clarity. So there has to be a Photoshop exercise to bring it to our understanding. So this is the difficulty with examples, because spiritual depth is an entirely different thing, even though we can produce some analogies which give us some idea. Now let's look at the idea. Let us look at the space idea. Just to give you some idea of how we have a sense of infinity without actually experiencing it, we can imagine ourselves going out beyond the borders of our solar system. We can imagine going to the beyond the galaxy also. But there's still an observer observing it. And the solar system, how vast is it compared to us? Well, if we talk about 4.6, I think it is billion kilometers in one direction and 9 billion kilometers in another direction, this gives us a vastness that has not been understood or seen previously. All our ancestors didn't understand that. They were all geocentrically orientated, but still we are geocentrically orientated. We're looking at things from our own position. Then what about the Milky Way in which we live? We used to think this was the only thing that existed. Now we understand so many other comparative Milky Ways, so many other galaxies, and dominant galaxies is our nearest neighbor, so many light years away. And the Milky Way is about 52,850 light years away. Can't even conceive of it. Because what is a light year? A light year is about, if you put 10, and then you put something like C6, something like about, about 20 knots behind it. 10 to that power kilometers. It's about 100,000 light years away. About 30 kilopascals or something like that. Universe itself. What about that? Well, so far, and we only know the observable universe, what we can catch with the eye, with the restriction of the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. Well, it's about 46 billion light years away. That's a lot. We can't even imagine. 1 light year is equal to, 186, you do the math, 186,000 miles per second. You times that by seconds to get minutes. You can calculate how far away it is in terms of kilometers, and it's just incalculable. We have no idea. And when we reach to the edge of it, which gives us an effect of longer wavelengths, distorted, what we call redshifting, it may continue. So we don't know where is the edge of our world. It is too vast to calculate. We can only get some abstract idea about it. We don't have to, fortunately, explore the depths of the ocean. We don't have to explore the vastness of space to understand spiritual depth. Spiritual depth starts with ourselves. We take for granted that whatever we find in the universe applies exactly to our small universe, our microcosm called a human entity. If I was a bacteria and I was having a conversation with a group of scientific bacteria, I would say, look at this vast universe. We see spinning galaxies. These are blood platelets, blood cells. We see things whizzing past. We hear a rush. It must be the cosmic microwave background of our universe. And they couldn't understand the depths of it. Bacteria is half a micron. That is, a micron is a thousandth of a millimeter in width and 1 micron long, let us say. So you see, it is all proportionately relative. But what applies to the depths inside a bacteria, a single cell? Or what applies to the depths of the accumulation of cells that we call the biological human will have to be exactly the same. Just as every wave in an ocean will be exactly the same as the ocean itself. There are names and there are forms, but there's a substance behind there, and it's undeniably the same. You can't say a wave will declare its independence and say, I'm completely different from the ocean. The ocean has its own problems. Let me try to discover what is the depth of my nature. Well, what you'll do is you'll find your nature is water, and the ocean itself is water. And the only difference is that when you dive down deep into the ocean, the action of the wave becomes less, and it becomes less in layers and levels. You must have noticed going into a cold sea how the surface is warmed, and so the first layer of it is actually warm, comparatively speaking. And as you go into deeper water, it becomes colder and colder, less influenced. So we can make this comparison. And when we are told by these great mystics to access the depth of our own spirituality, to access the depths of our own nature, the word occurs to them, dive. Just like a bird will dive down to catch fish. You dive down, or a human dives down with suitable diving equipment and discovers the depths of their own nature. And there they find it's much vaster than their familiar world. It is much more profound. It is much simpler. Now, when we talk about simplicity versus complexity, we come across a materialist difficulty. Because the materialists will say, based on biological evolution, where something simple and not very clever becomes something immensely complex and extremely clever, called a human being. And so if the source is simple, it must necessarily be unintelligent. But you see how we use these models and add our own belief systems. Materialism is a belief system, and we have a trap. The trap is much of our belief, we can examine it on an individual level, much of our belief, there is no obvious ground to believe it. It is just a kind of social conditioning. For example, we observe that some people may have cancerous cells. We accept the whole understanding that there is a cancer and people are subject to cancer. Now you ask the average person, all right, can you explain what is a cancer cell? Can you explain how it grows? Can you explain how it gets treated? What is the physiology to do with it? Not many people will be able to answer. You go to a doctor and you're dependent. You say, okay, I have this symptom. The doctor says, oh, it's likely this, prescribes a medicine. We neither inquire what the medicine contains, nor do we inquire about the physiology. We simply depend. Same thing happens in the acceptance of things in modern science because we don't have the time and we don't have the expertise to be skilled in every single area. There are some things we just take for granted. And much of our belief system is based on what we might call commercial advertising. Somebody says something, this famous phrase, they said this, they said that. We have no idea who they are, but we take it and accept it and integrate it into our belief system. There was a time when many people believe, and still believe, the earth is flat. There's a flat earth society going on. And no matter how much science will prove conclusively what we mostly by and large accept, and that is, no, there's a round earth and we can view it from outer space and so on, these people will still find reason to say, no, it's flat earth. Anybody who believes the earth is flat has never cycled up some challenging hills like Hoth, for example, in Dublin. I'm joking. So it is incredible that we have managed to scan our social environment and then take on a belief system which is not necessarily our own. And we accept it. Only when we examine something carefully will we really come to a position of truth. So the ancient sages said, let me take this as a sample of the entirety. That's the only axiom we'll take. And we'll take one more axiom. I exist. You can doubt anything else, away from all belief systems. But one thing that is common to all humanity is I exist. Not only all humanity, but it's common to every single species we can think of. A sense of individuality that is based on existence. And knowing this, we resist any non-existence. We want to cling to life, regardless. And this has been interpreted in biological terms as struggle, survival of the fittest. There's a reason why we don't wish to dispense with life. There's a reason why we do everything by eating, by drinking, perhaps by exercising, by trying to do what we can to prolong our longevity. There's a big research department all over internationally with many, many different interested parties to see how can we extend the human life. Well, you cannot do it indefinitely. There's no infinite aspects to anything that is an assemblage of parts. There'll be decay, inevitably, and it's built into our system, and we have to accept it. In the meantime, if the body goes away, if the mind or the mental faculties go away, is there anything left? And so this inquiry is there, which says, let us assume that we don't know everything, that we know very little, that we only know the superficial aspects of our experience, and that we're interpreting things according to our limitations. Having accepted that, the next thing we want to know is, let us make an internal inquiry. And when we make this internal inquiry, we are going deeper. And we may not accept it from the limited point of view. Only conceptually we'll understand it. But experientially we'll understand it when we take measures to go into the depths. These measures are, broadly speaking, called spirituality. You can also use the term religion away from the common organizational concepts of religion, which says that at some point in religious endeavor, you will take personal responsibility and take an inner journey, a mystic journey inwards, which is real discovery. The rest is just knowledge, but a real discovery that requires an actual experience. It requires you to see, so that if somebody talks about God, publishes books endlessly, the author Joel Goldsmith makes a valid point. Many people talk about God. There are many books written, many lectures given, but how many know God firsthand? And tirelessly we repeat Swami Vivekananda's encounter with Ramakrishna. Have you seen God? Have you seen God? Not only have I seen him, I see him now. More real than you sitting there, and you also can see him come. Let us explore this. And so, based on people's evidential experience, We take it for granted and incorporate it not only into our belief system, but we make a validity because we know the source of it. We know who said it. We know when they said it in many cases. And there being one person discovering it, let's say a Buddha, one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all humans born. You take that as an example and say, there's a model. And somebody like Buddha claimed, I'm not special. I had to go through thousands of births to get to here. I'm a man. And I'm giving you the possibility. That's how I did it. I made an exploration in depth. What stimulates the exploration in the first place? Pain. Pain is the stimulus. We have a formula that allows us to struggle and survive against a world that we feel is against unfair odds. And we have some methods, and the methods are all biological methods. The methods are we either confront and attack, or we run away and withdraw, or we yield mesmerized. But there's one more technique that we have to apply, and that is love. Where do we get this love from? This is not the human kind of love. See, every animal can have empathy. The higher primates will all have empathy. Elephants, primates, all these mammals have intelligence. We know this from many, many tests, particularly with monkeys, capuchin monkeys, for example. You get monkeys in two different cages, they can see each other. Experimentally, you feed one side with a reward, let's say cucumber. Where the other monkey, separated by a cage, you feed grapes. Monkeys prefer grapes than the cucumbers. So you give the reward when they give a rock. That was the experiment done. They give a rock. They go and take a rock, they give it. As a way of reward, they get food. Cucumber on the one side, grapes on the other side. As soon as the monkey being fed cucumber understands my neighbor here is getting a higher food, getting grapes, they throw a tantrum and they reject. They actually throw the cucumber out and create a fuss, pointing, I also want this, please. So competition and struggle, of course, we inherit. It's there. But this is a biological nature, an instrumental nature. One of the problems that materialists make is to take the instrument for the foundation, to take it as a causal entity and not as an instrumental entity. It is equivalent to saying the light bulb is strong. And the light bulb, we can get a bigger, better light bulb, we can give greater strength, And when we turn the light bulb off, then we have turned the whole bulb off. The bulb is independent and responsible. No, it is not a causal thing. The cause is the electrical current behind it and the switch on, switch off button. So in these analogies, we can get some idea of a certain process. First process, part of the process would be to understand that I'm not the instrumentality. Once we clearly understand this, and there's a motive. And on the other side, there's a formula which says, my current way of dealing with things only creates frustration. I'm no different from the monkey who gets frustrated when I can't get what I want. It's purely driven by desire. And so two things are essentially necessary. These two things would be described as viveka on the one side, and vairagya. Viveka, understanding the reason for why we should make a deeper exploration. Because if you're indiscriminate about food, you'll get stomachache. If you're indiscriminate about the company you keep, then you'll have social difficulties and problems. If you're indiscriminate about the world and feel that you're a victim, then you will suffer psychological pain, emotional pain. If you are indiscriminate about anything, it's not in your favor. It's common sense to have some kind of discernment. And we have the equipment that has a capacity for discerning, and many people call this free will. Now, there's a big argument about free will that has gone on for eons. Do we have free will or not? Forget it. We act as if we have free will. And if I raise my hand like this, I did it voluntarily. It was not predetermined. You can't imagine that it was predetermined. I will to raise my hand and I lower it. Now, there are many things which are going on inside the body and inside the mind, which had a cause somewhere, no doubt. And the cause built up as the effect, which was an unfolding of my potential physically and mentally and all the rest of it. If I push a little forward, I'll find my spirituality, my spiritual nature. So the viveka is applied to many different systems. 4 systems we can take. Let's take, for example, the whole idea of jnana yoga as an approach, because the question says, how can we go to this fundamental nature in depth? And first of all, from just a principle point of view, as a logical point of view, we know there is an observer for everything observed, an observer and something observed. 2 things are there. There is something that is permanent and something that is changing. If it wasn't like that, we wouldn't be able to observe the changing. And even when the anesthetist gives us some anesthetic and the brain, as it were, goes into a different wave mode where we have no conscious experience, external conscious experience, still there's a kind of internal conscious experience of peace, a kind of blank, but there's still an awareness. And so subjective consciousness still exists. We can't get away from it. And so this pure understanding will give us a technique that says, this is real, that's a category, that is permanent. This is unreal, relatively speaking, and this is impermanent. This changes, this does not change. There is a perceiver that doesn't change. There's a perception that changes, or an object that changes. And there's a process of perception that links the two. This is one kind of discrimination. And what will we see? Not just this nitty-nitty, this elimination technique, the permanent thing is not this, not that. But there's a positive aspect to it, to say, well, this permanent thing we are seeing permeating, as it were, as a flow through all hands, all eyes, all heads, including this one that seems to be examining it. I'm not the exception. That is the one technique, and forever making this inquiry is for people of subtle intellect and keen understanding. The vast majority of people will have some different version of this viveka. What will it be? The vast majority of people in this day and age, unlike the ancient rishis of old, would take the collection of energy that we call emotion, and they will steer it towards something that seems to be outside our human realm. Something that nevertheless is understood, the more the mystic journey continues, to be internal, entirely. Kingdom of Heaven is within you. And to link the external and the internal, starting off with a profound love, means a thankfulness. Loving that entity that we call in religion God, because that God is lovable. What do we mean by God? That being that is responsible for the rhythm and the balance and the laws of the universe, responsible for my heartbeat, responsible for my blood cells doing the job, responsible for digestion of food, responsible for capacity to think and examine, the capacity to take our emotions and without any sense of reward or punishment from it, simply have a sense of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness. And once that feeling comes, and that becomes more, and once we dedicate our love towards God, make it more profound, make it deeper, make it enriching, the more we feel a connection. And that connectivity is an opening for us. It opens the heart. It opens the heart to new possibilities, to a profound depth of feeling that we could never get from the feeling orientated toward personal desires. And with that level of discrimination, that means that leads us to a detachment from the things that we find are superficial and therefore relatively unimportant, to attachment to the most profound thing, which religion calls God. And with that profound feeling explored, we now are not just diving into the depths, we're diving into the nectar of the depths. We're diving into blissful base. And the more we do that, the more we're inclined to do it. This is the mystic journey. So what does this depth mean? This depth conceptually we can understand. In practice we have to engage. We have to engage all the instrumentation we have, namely the intellect, the emotions, and also the hands. And that leads to the second question. What will we do with our hands? So we know that there is karma yoga. Karma yoga has two versions to it. We can either do every activity mindful of the present moment, not disturbing the mind with anxiety and anticipation for the future, not laboring and brooding of the past and past things, not at all. What we can do is we can take this opportunity and with an awareness steered toward the here and the now, all these other aspects of the why, which is a past question, and all the doubts and difficulties associated there, and all the anxieties and difficulties that we find in anticipation of the future, all go away when we become mindful. But the present moment, mindfulness of it, has some other component in it. And this component brings up feelings of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness because it requires observation. Now, when we also link this, with worship, we can have a system that we can broadly describe as karma bhakti. We can say, there is nothing of my own. Unfortunately, we have decided and we operate on the basis of individuality and individualism. But when you really analyze it properly, nothing belongs to us. So when we talk about surrender, what is this surrender? Surrender, do we have any examples of it? Yes. We have military examples. Two parties are at war, and one party surrenders. So in this one party surrendering, they agree to the terms and conditions of the other, but are they totally happy about surrendering? No. So there's an unhappy surrender situation. The easiest and blessed way, the best surrender we can think of is a child's surrender. A child is born, it involuntarily surrenders to the parent and requires a dependency on the parent. It's not big enough to assert its own independence. And the problem is, the more it asserts its own level of independence, the more problems occur. So to adopt a childlike aspect of this is a hugely important component of what we call bhakti yoga. It requires yearning. It requires replacing the desires that we have with a desire for God. Viveka, as we were describing earlier, has its consequence called vairagya. Vairagya means I give up all desires which are egocentrically orientated. And when we do that, it becomes an opening for us, and we realize that this surrender, like a flower surrenders its individuality if it ever had one, and is generous enough to spread its perfume and its beauty everywhere to all indiscriminately. So, what does surrender work mean in a practical way? There is a very beautiful passage in the Kathopanishad, and it tells us very clearly that you think that you are striving independently for your spiritual freedom. No, it requires grace. It's put in this way. Nayam atma pravachani na labhyo na vidhaya na bahuna shrutina. The self cannot be attained through sermons or intelligence. It doesn't come from listening to me or others. A lot of listening, not even to the scriptures or the Vedas. No, he whom the self chooses, by him the self can be gained. The self chooses it. Theologically, it's called God's grace. To him the self reveals its subtle nature. But he who has not turned away from bad conduct, whose senses are not pacified, whose mind is not peaceful, cannot realize the self through knowledge. How do we access the grace? We access it through discipline. We access it through love of God. All of these things we have to access it. And in order to do that, we have to adopt a certain position of surrender. It's a bit like if the dam wall does not surrender its solidity, the water will not flow through. If we do not surrender our sense of individuality, then the divine grace will not flow through. So we have to surrender our ego, our egoism. This is why we do, as a foundation course to deal with this, we deal with this Enneagram and Essence of Truth. And recently, we did a residential course on it, a retreat, and with a small number of people. And so what did they learn? There's no standard ego. We are conditioned by two things. We're conditioned by our past, which presents us with a habit level, and we are also dependent on our response. And our response will be based on the former, no doubt. But if we orientate ourselves around an independent self struggling against the overwhelming odds of the world, struggle, survival of the fittest, then we will not access the depth of divine grace that flows through us. So the first thing we have to do is we have to surrender like a child. We're all dependent. We're laboring under the illusion that we are independent. But I don't think I pump my heart. I don't think I digest my food. I don't think I repair my cells. I don't think I solve problems in dreams independently. I don't think, when I analyze it properly, that I have energy of my own. It's an assumption. No doubt, what I feed in with food provides me with physical and mental energy. But when you trace it back, it's not my food. My food is grown by another. And that is entirely dependent on rainfall. It's dependent on nutrients in the soil. It's dependent on the sun, the cooperation of all these elements, the air, the sun, the water, the earth. All of these cooperate in order to sustain my energy and produce this wonderful, marvelous thing of taking raw material and convert it into energy, this metabolism of the human body. Never mind anything else. As long as I'm identifying myself with the human body, I can easily say that in no way am I independent. The only independence I can assert is maybe the exertion of what I might call free will, but even that is allowed to me. It is constructed in such a way that I can have two choices. Coming back to Kathopanishad, we can go through the pleasurable or the preferable. Two paths are there, and we have to make that conscious choice. When we look at all the complexity of life and how it is arranged well, there is no way we can claim any ownership for anything. And when we renounce this prophet-actor complex, then at that point, our work becomes different. It's not that work is something separate. Brother Lawrence understood this. He understood the secret. Let me review his prayer once more. Since you are with me, he's making a prayer to God. Lord, since you are with me. See, the bhakti yogi does not think that God is absent or abstract. Intimately, I know, I see, I can speak, and I can listen. Since you are with me now, as I take up my work, yes, the work that you've allocated to me, with your hands, with your limbs, all belong to you. I surrender it all to you. They become yours. Turning my attention to the external affairs of my life, necessarily, we all have to eat, we all have to drink, and we all have to work. I ask you for the gift of your presence. Now he's talking from a monastic point of view. He's in a monastery. And in our community, still washing has to be done. Still floors have to be cleaned. Doors have to be answered. And food has to be cooked. And all the plates have to be washed after that. So all the affairs of my life, when I orientate my attention toward that, what happens to this presence, this ownership, this prophet-actor complex? He says, one prayer I need you. You can dispense everything to me. I ask you for the gift of your presence. It's the only thing I ask for. What is devotional meditation? Is practicing the divine presence internally. And externally, when I see you in everything, and I see you in all energetic activities and expressions. So I'm asking you for your divine grace. In line, he didn't know the Kathopanishad. In line with that, how will we access this grace? We have to turn away from bad conduct. We have to make sure that the senses are not disturbed, that they're all pacified. And we do that by making the mind peaceful. And when these preconditions are there, we don't have to get something from the outside. We will realize the self through knowledge. That means some revelation occurs. And so, help me, he says, as I work and receive all that I do. In other words, all that I do is a gift to you. It's not that I constructed it and I'm giving it to you. These were yours in the first place. And what I'm doing is I'm simply giving them back to the real owner, renouncing the prophet-actor complex and giving them to the real owner. And so receive all that I do. Take my love. I'm offering my love. Please take it. My heart is yours. As in a human relationship, that's what happens. My heart is yours. Take my love. As I continue with my work, not discontinue it, not run away from it. I continue my intimate conversation with God. Intimate conversation. Not bringing him out on a Sunday. Not praying, please give me this, please give me that. A listening mode of prayer that is intimately connected, heart to heart. Individual heart to cosmic heart. God is love. As I continue with my work, I continue my intimate conversations, asking for divine grace. That's the only prayer. I don't ask for anything else, only divine grace, that you will always be connected with me. I will not feel any absence of you. Surrendering all that I do. Now, the question is, that's fine in principle, but how do I make it practical, the questioner is asking. We're engaged in all kinds of activities, he says, professional, personal, secular tasks. Yes, join the human race. How to surrender all we do? We have to register the real ownership, not to ourselves. We have to surrender our independence. We have to come to a realization that professional activities are not mine. Personal activities are not mine. Secular tasks are not mine. They are all spiritual. The questioner has made a distinction. He has thought that all activities are on the one side under the category of secular, and that spiritual life is all on the other side, and there's a disconnection. All activities are spiritual activities because the foundation of our whole life is spirit. There's nothing else here except spirit. And so we often get into this misunderstanding. This misunderstanding is collectively called Maya. We mistake one thing for another. We come back to the original thing necessary. We have to use this viveka or discernment. In this case, understanding nothing belongs to me. No energy is mine personally. No decision I make is based on my personal activity. No, there's a flow that comes to me. The light bulb cannot claim its independence. It requires the electrical current behind it. It is all God's grace flowing. So what's blocking it? If I ask, may your grace be sustained, is another way of saying, may you remove all the blockages to it. What are the blockages? The main blockage will be an egocentric position. And so how do I? Well, Brother Lawrence himself gives the formula. Let me pray for grace, for the divine grace, that I may not forget you in all these activities. Now, we cannot steer our attention, normally speaking, continuously in the midst of these activities for this reason. When we do a task efficiently, all our awareness and concentration goes into the individual task until we get into the habit of a divine presence, a feeling of a divine presence always with us. But at least we can make an offering before the activity and after the activity. And if we feel we cannot do it either before or after, we can do it before or after. When I was at school, at the secondary school, all our work, whatever we wrote, we had to write at the top of the page, AMDG, which is, these are alliterations for the greater glory of God in Latin. So all activities have been done for the greater glory of God. When a man was blind from birth and Pharisees came and asked Jesus, so here's a question, trick question. He's blind from birth. Is it caused by the sin of his parents, genetically, or is it because of his own activities? Now, he's born from birth. And Jesus replies, neither, but to reveal the glory of God, and healed him. In other words, all our conditions are there. They are clues. They are indicators of the glory of God. We don't have to look far for it. We just look into the sky and we'll catch an idea of infinity. We look at the clouds. It can remind us of the drama being played by water vapor. And when it moves on, we can see the blue sky again. We don't have to go far. We look outside and we see the effects of rainfall on a plant. In Africa, we have two seasons, dry season and rainy season. In the dry season, by October, this time of the year, everything is absolutely dry and looks absolutely dead. And when the first rains come with thunder and lightning, profuse rain, tropical rainfall, within a day, not even, everything turns green. Life is there. We find the resurrection of the dead things into living greenery. Instantaneously, rivers start flowing where before they were dry riverbeds. We don't have to go far to see and witness the glory of the divine in the breath, in the thought currents, in the capacity to walk, in the capacity to talk, in the capacity to sing, the capacity to elevate the mind into cultural activities and beyond, into such a state that an inner rapture occurs in a state of thankfulness. It doesn't take much, it doesn't take many jumps. And what is meditation after all? But taking a journey into the interior step by step, enjoying the journey of it too. We can take one jump if we like, but for most people, we can go step by step into increasing degrees of subtlety and depth. We get something much more profound, much more truthful. So these are some answers to this question. And in all of them, we are dealing philosophically with the fact that we are laboring under the illusion that we are entirely individual. And when we put our ego aside and make it an open channel for divine grace to flow and become a child of God, somebody who has an intimate relationship with our most beloved bhakti yoga path, which Brother Lawrence is on, in that point, grace starts flowing within us. And when that grace starts flowing, we are easily able to see that every activity, whatever it is, whether it's described as professional, personal, secular, every activity is really a flow of divine grace in expression. When I was on this Enneagram retreat, of course, part of it was yoga exercise, as we do on the silent retreat in Delgan Park. There's a provision for yoga exercise. And I make sure that everybody understands there's no such thing as competitive yoga. What we are doing is we are simply expressing the health we already have. Same thing in all your activities. You're expressing the divine grace which you already have. And when you put it and shift your understanding in this way, life becomes a glorious expression of the divine. And then you start seeing this everywhere, in everything. So these are some answers to these questions. We have, anyway, so I'll love and leave you there. I wish you a successful Diwali and Kali Puja for tomorrow. I'm here in London, and this is the fifth occasion that I'll be the pujari for the Kali Puja here in London. And this is the fifth year in a row that I'm doing it. You probably expect, a large number of people. And I think at the ashram there, you're expecting a large number of people. It's wonderful from a distance to see the level of wonderful dedication and organization that you've put into that. And especially the organizational capacity that Swami Purnananda has shown. It is wonderful to see all these celebrations and these organizations going on. I wish you every success with it and every blessings. Thank you.
Happy Deepavali.